Hello and welcome back to Imagine Live from Ericsson, where we take a close look at the future of limitless connectivity and invite you to share your thoughts live. Now, for anybody dealing with 5G IT or specific industry verticals, understanding ecosystems is a very specific and important skill. The cellular ecosystem is continuously evolving, especially around significant generation shifts like the present one from 4G to 5G. And that makes it central to the digital transformation of businesses and the adoption of cloud-based applications. And as the landscape transforms and borders become less clear, navigating ecosystems gets increasingly complex. So let us start to understand how ecosystems are shifting and growing. To help me with that, I have two experts in the industry. The first, Peter Linder, head of thought leadership, Ericsson. The market area is North America. Welcome to the program, Peter. How are you today?
Thank you very much, Alex. Everything is great in Texas here, so happy to be on the show.
Oh, brilliant. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. And also joining us from the other part of the world is Lars Lind, who's the principal with Arthur D. Little's Gothenburg office. How are you today, Lars?
Doing all well, Alex. It's such an interesting topic, so I'm just happy to be here to discuss it with you guys.
Oh, well, we're also glad that we were able to take you away from an important part of your life, which is 2 weeks you've been a dad. So thank you very much for coming in to the program and helping us understand the basics of ecosystems. I just want to say that you can join in, anybody can join in. You can participate by adding your comments to Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, where we are live. Now, talking about those basics, Lars, I'm going to start by getting down to them. What exactly does Ericsson mean by the word ecosystem, and why are they so important in today's business environment?
I'm happy to give some perspectives to that question, Alex. I think, put simply, we can just view an ecosystem as sort of a network of organizations that are involved in delivering solutions to address some customer need, right? And that has been the case for ages. Companies, they collaborate with suppliers, distributors, retailers, all have their own role in the sort of the production and delivery of a product or service. So to the question of why this is important, I think the main answer to that lies in digitalization, because it's changing how business is being carried out and what is required to succeed in the future. It's moving toward a more, what we can call an ecosystem-centric view, right? So let me explain why, right? So first and foremost, we're seeing more digital ways of working, new kinds of communication channels having become commonplace. I mean, the COVID pandemic has demonstrated that more than anything, making it easier really for organizations to identify opportunities and collaborate. In economic terms, we sometimes speak about transaction costs, which is simply the cost of doing business. We can sort of expect that to have decreased with new digital ways of working. But the other aspect, which I think is equally, if not more important about digitalization, is that it's a sort of driving force for a new set of innovations and technology breakthrough. Whether it's applications in blockchain technology, could be new applications for drones, autonomous driving. We see the metaverse as a new concept discussed very much in recent times, and a lot of companies taking big bets. These so-called emerging or disruptive technologies, and it's all digital really. And it's not only that we see a sort of faster pace of development, we're also seeing how they are increasingly sort of intersecting with each other, interacting to create new profound use cases. Again, the metaverse is a good example there. It's not a new concept on its own, but it's built on IoT, on virtual reality, on digital twins, and so on. And I realize I'm sort of just mentioning a lot of tech terms here, and that's sort of the point as well, because you realize that you cannot possibly be an expert on all of them at the same time. So, what can you do if you're an organization and you recognize you somehow need to find your place in all of this? Say you're in charge of a public hospital, and you can see how you can use sort of ambulance drones as a complement to the conventional ambulances. Speaking of the ambulance, you can see how you can sort of connect that one with high-speed connectivity to deliver sort of real-time footage of the emergency and deliver that to the doctors at the hospital. You may see how you can leverage virtual reality to train your staff into conducting operations in a virtual risk-free setting. And it goes without saying, I think, that you cannot be an expert on virtual reality, on drones, or build your own private network for the ambulance drones. So you need to gauge the ecosystem, collaborating with those who know the the nature of the technology and how to deploy it. And I think that's one of the key points of why ecosystems are relevant. It changes the logic of how to do business, moving to a state where collaboration makes more sense. Because it's easier, the more things to collaborate on, and there are more opportunities to grasp in this new digital economy.
It's a hugely complex, ecosystem, isn't it? It's a hugely complex moment that we're moving into as digitization and as we move from 4G to 5G. And Peter, I'm wondering, how long have the two of you been in conversation about ecosystems, sort of setting your mantle out with the process and the value of ecosystems between the two of you?
I would say that our collaboration goes back 6-7 years. We saw a steep increase in around 2015. In 2015, if you remember back then, that we had just introduced 4G a little bit before that, and the first iPhones with 4G was available. So we started to see apps being powered up by the 4G networks. At that point in time, we started to see many companies come in asking us and say, well, what's the next G about? What if we can tie our business closer to that one? So our collaboration started very much with a job which is about describing the potential for different industries to take advantage of 5G. Focused on 10 different industries in the beginning, and describe what we thought that could look like. We had analyzed a large number of use cases that we saw potentially could change the industry, and then by industry, and also start grouping them together. As we start clustering them and seeing, hey, what about if a use case works well in one industry, couldn't be applied for a different industry? So I think it goes back 6 to 7 years, and then for this particular work here, we've been collaborating quite extensively over the winter to try to put our thoughts together.
Because so much of your collaboration and the result of it is a framework for understanding how people should think about ecosystems and how they can potentially fit in. But a lot of this thinking happens, as you mentioned, when we do have a big innovation shift, when there's some kind of new technological innovation. And I'm wondering if you could explain to me, Peter, about the difference between ecosystems in 4G and what we would expect in 4G and what we might expect now that we are in a 5G world.
Yeah, so when I tried to explain it, I tried to point to the 4G world was very homogeneous. We had one device that was driving the attention centerpiece for everything, that was a smartphone. We had one type of network, or one type of connectivity rather, universal connectivity, so all applications were using the same connectivity. And then we have clouds, all the applications are in our phones and residing in a cloud. And typically clouds during that era was very focused on centralized clouds. So few central locations, very much optimized for lowest possible cost. So access to cheap electricity was important. And then the two of them were together. And if you're an innovator in that world, you're typically thinking about, I'm going to create an app here. I know the device, I know the connectivity, I know the cloud. I don't need to bother about that. Almost to the point that you didn't really think about it. They were just there. And then you decided whether you were going to be in one or both of the app stores. And when I try to see what does that relate to something that everybody can understand, that's pretty much like playing around with the Legos we did when we were a kid. Perhaps we don't need to go back to the Duplo days when it was just big blocks, but when we were pretty young and tried to put together something like this. So the ecosystem challenges, both the ecosystem were confined and also the things that we were doing. But now when we move to 5G, we're more into these kind of things. I don't know if you can see it here. Let's see if I'm moving stuff in the right direction. The big things that we can do, very sophisticated things with a large number of individual components. And what I mean with this metaphor is essentially as we move into when 5G start to become nested with IoT in a number of different industry verticals, we have more options, we have more pieces to play with, which is making it a little bit harder to play, but the things you can create is so much richer. And so essentially this whole story about the ecosystem that we're talking about here today is help you to move from the small, simple things where everything in the ecosystem was clear and almost intuitive, to be able to map out a more sophisticated world where you can do richer things if you understand how the ecosystems are linked together and how they work.
It's quite an exciting moment, that, that evolution. I remember when my own child moved from Duplo to Lego. That was a big moment, because the complexity, there's so much more complexity involved, and it also created different ways of innovating within her experience. And so I really like that Lego analogy. Thank you very much. It hit home. I want to let you know that this is fantastic. We have people joining in from all over the world, folks from Brazil, from India, from Pakistan, from Colombia, from Angola, and from Iran. And they have fantastic questions that are also coming in. First one is, will the market for 5G services be the same as 4G services? And Lars, I'd like to ask you that question.
For one more time. Question?
Sure. Will the market for 5G services be the same as 4G services?
Yeah, I think it's to the point what Peter mentioned. It will be more flavorful and more multifaceted. As to what Peter mentioned, we're seeing much more opportunities within the 5G world as a result of the growth of IoT and smart things, more cloud opportunities, more options within the connectivity space. And that will mean that we will see a lot of service providers sort of bundling together different capabilities to create new offers. So I think we'll see less of the kind of mass market approach that has been some part of the previous generations of ecosystem, right? We'll see much more diversity in that sense. And that's also true because we're seeing more diversity in types of needs from the user, right? You will have some users with a particular requirement and a completely different requirement in a different industry for a different user. So in that sense, there will be more options, more diversity, and more flavorness.
Peter, can you give us a couple of examples, perhaps, of what Lars is speaking about, and also perhaps of, Lars mentioned the hospital example. Are there any other examples that you might raise that really tap into this, to some of the issues that Lars just raised?
Yeah, I think when I describe this, I often describe to like the way service has been traveling over the networks now in the 4G wave. It's been very much uniform for everything. Often talking about services being over the top, or so you don't really tie them to the connectivity at all. And that is essentially like driving on a road that has 7, 8, 9 lanes wide, but we have yet to put any paint on the road. So we haven't put any paint into creating lanes. We haven't created any diamond lane or bus lane for the things that we think should be coming on time. And we haven't putting any bicycle lane into protecting the small portions of the traffic. So as we move into this, I think you're going to see a tighter connection between some of the most performance sensitive applications, because all of a sudden, this is not only important any longer for just entertainment or internet applications where perhaps for casual use, we're going to see business and mission critical applications running on these networks. And the moment we say business and mission critical, we typically want to carve up a portion of the network, tying the services to unique capabilities that are required and making sure that each of the critical services get their what they need. And when I say critical services, perhaps one example you can think about when you're filming something and filming it in real time and connecting that to artificial intelligence, so you can take intelligent decision based on what's happening. You do a lot of these things to prevent things from going bad, rather than, hey, let's figure out a few weeks later why certain things went bad. And things that are of this nature, when you are dependent and you're trying to do things pretty much close to real time, that's where when slicing and the new capabilities that we have in the network come into play. So I would think like that, and see what can we really change the way we did things before and after as the ones benefiting the most.
Lars, there is one question from Charles Cowan in London. What are the expected trends of an industry-centered ecosystem?
The trends of an industry-centered ecosystem. I guess we'll talk a bit about the different ecosystem types, which is an interesting concept. I think the industry one is the the conventional way to look at the world of business, right? Because there's a lot of this industry classification that we can break down the market into the different subsections, so to say. The trends we see in the industry is, of course, a lot of, like to Peter's point again, the idea that we're seeing more mission and business critical applications where, again, 5G comes into play to provide a kind of reliable services required to run those operations. I think that's one of the main thing where sort of linked to the 5G ecosystem point. Of course, there's a lot of industry-specific trends that we see, and I think we can give some examples when we get to that as well. But the sort of overarching trend that we observe is the fact that we're getting to more a state where the operations is dependent on reliable services, where connectivity becomes ever more important, really.
I think I can chime in a little bit.
Oh, please go ahead.
I can chime in a little bit on that one as well. And I think there's a few trends that stands out to me. One of the first one is related to technology and the fact that it's not only one technology that creates a disruptive shift in the market. That is 5G combined with edge computing, combined with AI, where you're combining multiple disruptive technologies together in an innovation, which is creating an exponential potential for that innovation once you've figured out how it works. So I think it's also, when you do that, it's most likely the potential to have to solve many small problems that then builds up to the innovation. So essentially creating one large innovation, many small micro innovations at a time. Coming back to this one, little box here, there's 830 pieces here. I don't think it's 830 pieces in every innovation that you're going to create, but you get the idea here that this, like, our understanding and our knowledge of many small of the different pieces is what's driving the innovation. And when you're looking from the ecosystem perspective, you might not be able to do all of this yourself. Your little brother might be doing the back end of the car and your big sister doing the front end of the car, and you focusing in the middle. And a little bit those kind of thinking and some behaviors in terms of driving innovations.
So actually, Peter, this taps into something that I wanted to find out a little bit more now. What you're describing is very complex. There are lots and lots of different stakeholders. How do you map that for industry verticals and, for innovations to create those innovations?
No, it's a little bit, this is like perhaps one of the essential parts that we've done with this work together here, where we're trying to make a map that is easy and straightforward that you could understand and start mapping things out on. So in the 4G world, I think you could work very well with devices, connectivity, and the cloud, and assuming that it was just one choice or one option of each of the three. If you're looking at forward right now, I think when you're looking at the cloud, you're perhaps looking at both storage and compute as two different things, because different applications have different needs there. And breaking down the networking or the connectivity, both in terms of who is providing it and what is the technology that goes into providing it. And when you're coming down to the usage and closer to the beneficiary, looking at both what is the device, what is the application, and is there any integration work required to bring the different pieces together? So I think we have looked and built a model that perhaps takes you one level below that on the pass a double click test, and allow you to operate and map it out on that more granular level, which I think is a little bit of a key. So I think you need maps with finer high granularity. If you're in the US, it doesn't work with just working with the nation. You need to work on state level or perhaps even county level on certain things.
And one of the really interesting aspects of the work that you've done, Lars, is you've created what you describe as lenses. Could you talk about lenses? Because I think that's quite a helpful thing for the audience to hear as they think about the different ways of diving into innovations.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just for the context of those lenses, right? I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, you can think of an ecosystem just as a network of companies collaborating for some common goal in mind. But the difficult part of it is that they're sometimes difficult to sort of define and delineate, right? So we have seen that you can have an ecosystem of an entire industry, say the healthcare industry, to the previous example, but it can also be this local ecosystem within the healthcare. So you can have the public healthcare system, for example. And then you may also say that, okay, so this public healthcare system is partially also intersecting with the IT and connectivity ecosystem, because you may have, let's say, the healthcare practitioner are providing the patients with the connected wearables that can display different health parameters and send alarms in case of emergencies. So they are then, by definition, part of the sort of IT and connectivity ecosystem. There is a device manufacturer in the background, there's a connectivity service provider, there's someone who's managing the cloud, and so on. And there are, of course, countless examples of like that. Yeah. So sort of to make sense of that reality, we have applied these different lenses. There are 5 of them, and they're really founded on the idea that each ecosystem have a different anchor point, right? And we've seen 5 of those sort of generic anchor points. The first one is what we call the place ecosystem. So it refers to a physical or a virtual place. Whenever we hear smart airports, factories, mines, venues of different kinds, that's typically a place ecosystem. We also have what we call a thing ecosystem, referring to a thing or an object. It could be a device like a smartphone, some form of equipment, a connected screwdriver, a machine, piece of infrastructure, anything physical really. And obviously with the growth of IoT and smart things, this lens has become ever more useful. Then we have what we call a process ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that sort of identifies and attempts to improve a set of value-adding activities. It can be reducing the costs in a production plant. It can be improving the safety of the employees by different means, right? Typically, you see this in supply chain management. And when you look at with this lens, you can see how different players come together with their technologies, with their new ways of working to make the process improve. Then we have the technology ecosystem. And you would mention that there are many disruptive technologies that's coming out there. 5G is a focal point of this discussion, and I think that's a good example of a technology ecosystem where a lot of players, come together and collectively contribute to the advent of 5G and the standards that are continuously being developed. Of course, there are other technologies that's not digital that's also worth mentioning. Things like electrification, genomics are equally disruptive in their own rights. And then the 5th one, that's the one that I think everyone recognizes. It's what we call the industry ecosystem. So it refers to the common industries like transportation, retail, power generation, and so on. And I think these are because they provide different perspectives to look at the world of business, really. And it may help sort of recognize opportunities that may have been difficult to see if you didn't apply the right lens at the right moment.
I think that's what I love about this, the way that you've broken it down, because I could definitely see different ways that I might, enter into the innovation ecosystem because you've broken it down almost into separate categories, and they make absolute sense. We do have a question actually from Lawrence on LinkedIn, which is, it ties in with both one of the questions that I asked before, but also this. And it has to do with the fact that place, I think, doesn't necessarily have to mean, for example, an airport or a hospital or a sports stadium, but it can also mean, say, a country that has different access to 5G and other technologies. Lawrence says, how will the market verticals impact the 5G value chain? And I would add the lenses in emerging markets like South Africa. Peter, I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, so I think that when we originally talked about these places, we had in mind something that was fairly geographically limited, so that you can actually talk about essentially what does it take to build out the network in particular in that particular area. If you expand it a little bit and look at it from say, hey, what about when we compare it on national level in terms of things that are happening earlier and things that are happening later in the cycle? I think that you can see here that it's becoming relevant the way we think about the ecosystems independently if we're early stages or late stages. I would say the main difference would be that if you're in the early stage market like the US or South Korea or something like that, then you very much have to do trailblazing with ecosystem thinking. If you come a little bit to some of the markets adopting the technology perhaps a little bit later, ideally they should be able to take advantage of the ecosystem work, and so that not everybody has to write the map, but that you can take advantage over maps really written. So one concrete example, if you're going to build coverage or connecting like sports stadiums in South Africa right now, why don't take advantage of the fact that hundreds of it has already been done in the US, and like the understanding of, well, how do we tie together leagues and teams and stadium owners and concession stands and broadcasters and all these different stakeholders in a sports venue together. So I think that the work is highly relevant in both type of scenarios, but the kind of work that you do is a little bit different between creating maps and taking advantage of pretty solid maps that already exist.
And that really is the benefit, I think, of creating a framework like this, which can be applied at any stage of the innovation process in whichever context you are. We have.
I think it's so important. It's like when I look at it, and when we came into it was very hard to see when you came in and started to understand how when 5G IT and industry verticals are combined. If you come into that with I came with a pair of 4G glasses, it was very hard to see really what was going on. But now, when as Lars talked about the different lenses here, it's like now I look upwards and I see places. I look downwards, I see things. I look to this side and I see processes, and here I see technology and the industry straight ahead. It's like it's a totally new world, and typically we as human beings, this is so hard and so complex. So it's really hard to, it's someone that should explain to you, describing what an iPhone was 15 years ago without showing it to you. Just having the words and say, just imagine it's like a 5 inches flat that you can point on. Oh, what does that do to me? So we as human beings, we have difficulties grasping these kind of complex things. And now, hopefully, we've provided something that's meaningful for all of you that's listening in terms of making that job a lot easier and helping the trailblazers to map out the things and helping the people come in a second wave to actually, don't they have a map of this? So we can run down the trails a little bit quicker.
Absolutely. I think that's why we need poets to be able to translate those things into the public imagination. Lars, you were talking, you've spoken about the healthcare system a lot, and it does make sense when you think about it as an ecosystem that's undergoing rapid disruption, and if you wish to use that term, but rapid change and transformation because of digital technologies. And I think that this might be a good example of what you're talking about, Peter, which is this idea of trailblazers, because in many ways, people can learn from what has come before, perhaps in different parts of the world or people at different stages of their development. But Lars, Deepak asks, how far are we from doing online surgery using 5G, and are there any use cases?
Yeah, but that's an interesting question, right? And there's a lot of use cases. Just to bring context to that question, I think, come back also what Peter mentioned, our long-standing work for several years, right? In the beginning, we still saw a lot of these use cases, including that one, right? And we saw that there's a lot of value to be had from 5G that different players could capture. And then we proceeded to see how you can sort of tap the market in different ways. We spoke about the use case clusters, and now recently coming with this sort of ecosystem view, right? And so we're learning continuously, we're learning both how we can look at these opportunities, and we're also learning how it can be deployed and how it can be realized. And I think that is one example of a use case that people have been speaking about for quite a long time, and there have been trials, of course, some more successful than others. How far are we from seeing that, sort of commercialized every hospital? I think we're still a bit to go there, because that is really an example of a life-critical situation when that connectivity is absolutely essential. And, as a patient, you wouldn't want to go under the knife unless you know for sure that it could be reliable surgery behind that.
But one thing on this, when we talk about, we often talk about the big leaps forward, and in terms of what the difference we can make. My mom went for surgery last week, and she had a trip planned this week with my sister. And they were kind of concerned that she had to go into the hospital and replace what you call the padding over the wound. And then the doctors told, no, that's no big deal. We can do that online. So the only thing, go wherever you were planning to go, When it's time to have it replaced, you call in to us, you speak to a nurse, and she'll take you through exactly the steps that you've taken. She'll also take a picture of it, see how much was bleeding and not bleeding, so what it looked like, and then based on that action. That little thing that didn't exist before the pandemic that we have right now made the trip possible. Otherwise, the trip would have to been cancelled. So I think there's tons of these daily small things that we're going to improve. It's not only the large leap, and I think this is a little bit characteristic for this part of the ecosystem. There's so many large, small improvements that we can make on small things. So the net, all of that, it's the big thing. So when everything, like talking about a killer application, something that's going to blow the socks off everywhere at the same time. What if we can do the smaller things instead, and numbers of them? So a large river coming up made up of tons of creeks.
So Lars, given the enthusiasm and the excitement, and also the fact that we are seeing these rapid innovations coming into our everyday lives, you guys have been working on this for 6 years, right? Where does somebody who's just starting to think in an ecosystem way begin? How do they start to think about mapping out innovation, mapping out their ecosystem and where they fit in it?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to sort of operationalize these ideas that we've spoken about, and ultimately these are tools to help you identify the opportunities, I think you need to do it in a sort of sequential steps. So I would start by just trying to understand the sort of structure and characteristics of the ecosystem. Using those 5 lenses, we discussed the place, technology, thing, process, and industry. They can help sort of guide you to outline potential ecosystem then to further analyze. You may start by looking at the broader industry and then use the lenses to focus on specific parts of it. You also want to consider the maturity, and Peter was speaking about it briefly, right? Is it a mature ecosystem that is currently delivering value to customers, or is it more in the development phase, right? And that will change a lot of the dynamics of that ecosystem. So, let's say you are interested in the gaming ecosystem, for example. The way to approach that may be to think, so what are the specific ecosystem within that? You may look at the mobile gaming, cloud gaming, virtual reality gaming, and that sort of conventional PC and console gaming. And you will find that they have commonalities, but they're also slightly different, right? Different characteristics. You have slightly different players who are active and taking part in those. I think that would be the first step. And then secondly, I would try to understand the dynamics of that. So again, who are those players? How are they collaborating? How are they competing? What sort of strategic moves can we observe? And obviously they take some effort to outline, but it's really worth the effort, because then you have a sort of understanding for the third step, which I then would say is the idea of thinking about, what role and position could I take, or could my organization take? Both in the short and the long terms. Can I contribute with my particular capability? Can I orchestrate a set of value-adding processes? These opportunities start to really pop out when you have done this sort of pre-work. And when you found something, you may realize that, again, to use the gaming example, maybe you find that, I can bundle my connectivity with this sort of game and I can deliver it as a service model, for example, right? Then you start to get into a more action mode. So who should I partner with? How should I engage these people? How should we set up a partnership? And I guess the fourth step is really to think, so what do I need to do to get there? So you may find some opportunity you want to pursue, but you may realize that you need to put in some effort, integrate some of your own capabilities in-house. And you can also then start thinking a bit more long-term. So for the gaming example, you may realize that going forward, we will see certain games being powered by network slicing, for example, which is the technology that's up and coming. You may think of the haptic technologies, the metaverse that we spoke about, and so on. So briefly, those 4 steps, sort of outlining the structure and characteristics of the ecosystem, thinking about the dynamics, thinking about which role and position I could take on my organization, and then thinking what I need to do to get there. That's how I would structure it.
Peter, this methodology that Lars is describing sounds to me like a way for companies that have existing products that potentially could become obsolete in a next generation could continue to be relevant and enforce agile ways of thinking, of innovating. What do you think about that? Is this the best way for those organizations to reinvent themselves?
Yeah, I think we're all facing this reinvention challenge, because whatever categories we take a car, moving from a regular car to a hybrid car to an electrical car, and the fact that an electrical car is almost like it's a computer on wheels, that you can drive it, but it's might be optional. So I think a lot of these different things here is about being alert and understanding the context and how your business is moving forward, and then very alert and open on the opportunities that's emerging around, because some of these keys to your future innovation might reside outside of your industry. And by making sure that you have a good map of what it looks like, you have an idea of who are the people in other industries, where touch points to my industry should I be talking to, and see, because it's simply by listening to other people's and how they think about you and you think about them, and say, hey, we either seem to be on collision course here, or we are on parallel tracks here. We can benefit for collaborating. And I think it's this being open to that, and spending a little bit of time and trying to figure out what will our future role be, and are there any major pivots? Because there will be companies that take advantage of combining this multiple disruptive technology shifts and ending up on the exponential growth path. And there'll be others that miss a few of these and might go down south instead.
Peter, I have a question here specifically for you from Tony. And I think that this is a good example that you can fold in some of the things that we've talked about already. He says, in your experience, what is the most interesting use case of the data connection speed in North America on a 5G ecosystem so far? And I'll add to that, how do you think that this recognized an ecosystem way of thinking?
That's a great question, Tony. I think that the greatest things we have not really seen yet in terms of 5G, but you can take just the way how the 5G, how the unlimited packages around 5G are shaped in North America today. If you go back 10 years or so, it was pretty straightforward. You bought a subscription, it was a data bucket, and with a certain limit on it. Now, with the way most 5G packages are constructed, it's an unlimited package. And when you look what's going on into that package, there's a number of different things. There might be cloud storage included. There might be entertainment services included. There might security aspects included. So just by being alert and seeing what it's available around us, you've had so many more ingredients that you have been able to put into those packages. If you look a little bit more forward and look at something like, you can talk about augmented and virtual reality, up until very recently, the main option there was that you take a pair of VR glasses, you take a wire, and you connect that wire to an extremely powerful desktop computer. In the 5G world, we are in the process of cutting off that wire. We are in the process of moving the desktop computer to the cloud, or the compute and storage capabilities. We're in the process of taking out the big chunk of the batteries and the processing power and the memory from the device themselves, moving that to the cloud as well. And by doing that, enabling something that we call split rendering, which is, in the simple terms, you can say you do half the job in the glasses and the other half in the cloud. This is an example of an extremely complex ecosystem challenge that involved people who are great at graphic processor, people who are great at device processor, people that understand networking, and people doing the applications on top of it. So those kind of things, if you wouldn't have had 6, 7, 8 companies sitting down on tables every now and then, hey, can we do this in a better way? Well, if I do this and you do that, you guys could do this, and pulling it together. So this is perhaps example one, perhaps a little bit more simple and straightforward here. How's the ecosystem generated completely different unlimited mobile smartphone subscription offerings? And what do we see a little bit down the road, where you have to speak to companies that perhaps you didn't know about before. You didn't know the companies, you've never been to their conferences. So we're a group of people speaking this afternoon, for example, on exactly this subject for the metaverse.
Lars, I think that what Peter is describing is a very interesting and an exciting future. Mona in Iran has a question that tackles the issue in a slightly different way, and I think that it certainly is something that people do talk about when they talk about innovation, technology, and even 5G. Mona says, "What are the plans to help the environment with the 5G ecosystem? How have you incorporated that into your planning and into your model?"
Yeah. No, I think that's a valid point as well. And environmental, if you think broadly about the sustainability issues, they're becoming increasingly important, and they're important for all the different organizations. Again, the ecosystem sort of framework or map that we have developed, it's not particularly outlining sustainability issues by their own, but they of course help to shed lights on the challenges that exist there. And in a similar vein, then also helps outline the opportunities for it, because you will see there are a lot of use cases that relates to the improvement sustainability. We see energy efficiency of different kinds, utilizing both high-speed connectivity and other disruptive technologies like AI, for example, to improve the efficiency of production processes and ultimately reduce the footprint, the carbon dioxide. So there are many of these opportunities, and I think the ecosystem framework is a way to also shed light on that, not only the things that sort of focus on the value adding in terms of monetary gains, but also the other gains in terms of environmental issues and also in some case social issues, right? We talk about employee productivity employee safety as another mechanism that some use cases can target. So in essence, the framework is equally valid for that particular purpose, I would say, but it just depends on how you apply it again.
I think I can comment a little bit of how we applied it in our factory here in Texas. So we decided to build up a factory for manufacturing of 5G radios in Texas. Manufacturing radios at scale has not happened in the US for 20 years. So then there was a couple of fundamental things that we were trying to achieve. We had to automate it a lot so that you could operate it in a market with higher salaries than where it was produced before. Second, we wanted to be very environmentally friendly and looked at every single thing. So once you have a map mapped out of what a smart factory could look like, then you can go in and challenge the decisions for every single point and say, how do we cool it down? Well, what if we replace the regular solution with the thermal ice tanks that we cool down at night when the electricity is cheaper and then use during the day? What about if we don't just put a roof on the house, but that we put solar panels in? How much of our energy consumption need can be covered by that? So once you know what all the ingredients are, you can take out one ingredient and replace it with another one. And if you're driving towards, you typically have a couple of key agendas for what you're trying to do. So like increase the automation and drive the sustainability of the whole thing. And then you can go in and challenge each and every piece. So this is like the beauty of it, because you got an ecosystem, but it's not, your role in that ecosystem is not guaranteed if you're not the one that for that particular piece is the best choice for the future. So here it's allow you to more or less to replace piece by piece for something that is more environmentally friendly. And that is typically how you get to that point in the future.
That, I think both of you have created a fantastic wrap up and given clear examples of how the model that you've developed, the framework that you've developed, allows for the people who are listening, the people who are in the audience, to innovate and work within the framework to create their own ecosystems, adding different Lego blocks and different models as and where they see fit. I want to thank you, Peter and Lars, and everybody who has helped to steer our conversation by sending in a question. If you have enjoyed this broadcast, please keep commenting and sharing. We will answer questions in the chat. You don't need to tell me how connectivity is growing and developing. I think we've all got a very good idea of the possibilities of a world built around increasingly interactive ecosystems. But remember, if you want to learn more, you can find it all by signing up to the Ericsson blog series on ecosystem evolution. Please join us again on October 6th, when we will take a close look at why universal connectivity matters more than ever, and the power of applying exponential technologies across all sectors everywhere. Thanks for watching.